Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. And after checking out the Napoleon trailer from director Ridley Scott yesterday, I figured it was time to go back and continue the epic history TV series on Napoleon. Now, before I start talking about that, I want to apologize if you hear any fans or anything in the background for the audio. There might be a sort of hum. It's like 36 degrees out today in Vienna. It is insanely hot. So usually when I record these, I close all the windows because I have 4 windows here in the room. I turn off all the fans, close the door, turn the studio lights on, and then, record from there. But today, all the windows are open, fans going. I'm not putting the lights on. It's just ridiculous. Like 36 degrees. Ugh. Maybe it's worse where you're living. Hopefully it's better. But anyways, last time we were with Napoleon, it was 1812 on his retreat to Russia. And it was an absolute disaster. 1812 was a horrible year for him after marching into Russia with 500,000 men, him losing nearly all of them, and the French army basically being obliterated. He makes a miraculous retreat through Russia, and now Napoleon's really on his back legs. There's internal turmoil going on in France. You still have the ulcer known as Spain. Not saying Spain is an ulcer, but Napoleon's ulcer at least. And what is Napoleon going to do from here, right? When he's really put on his back legs. Let's see what happens in this one. If you haven't already yet, please remember to like, comment, subscribe. Thank you for joining me on this one so far. Let's get into it. Yeah, that's the thing. He could have bestowed peace upon Europe, but he just had to keep going. I mean, look, think of the territory at this point.
1812 had been a...
I mean, look at Europe, right? You have the majority of continental Europe under your thumb. Crazy.
Disastrous year for Napoleon. His invasion of Russia had led to the almost total destruction of an army of 500,000 men.
Yep.
Now Poland and Germany were wide open to Russian attack. Some advised Emperor Alexander that this was the time to make a favourable peace with Napoleon. Russia's own armies had been mauled, Western Russia devastated. But Alexander was determined to see Napoleon defeated for good, to free Europe from his clutches, and avenge Moscow's destruction by taking Paris. Napoleon's allies were deserting him. Prussian troops had already agreed a truce with the Russians. Schwarzenberg's corps marched back to Austria, which assumed a policy of watchful neutrality. Napoleon had left...
Yeah, and that's important to note too, is that Austria really at this point, you might think, if you've watched the series all over the place or maybe know a little bit, it's like, wait, isn't Austria France's enemy pretty much always throughout this? But Austria's really in no position to try and go against the French. They were obviously defeated beforehand, but still, the Prussians, the Poles, the Austrians, even somewhat the Italians, they're sort of loose allies. They're fighting under the French banner, but they don't obviously share the same identity as his Frenchmen. So, albeit you have an army of 500,000 men, but not all of them are as loyal to you as you would hope.
Marshal Murat in charge of the remnants of the army, but he left for the Kingdom of Naples, hoping to cut a deal with the Allies that would let him keep his throne.
Yep. See, not even your own marshals are sticking around.
He was replaced by Napoleon's stepson, Eugène, who'd proved himself a brave and able soldier in Russia, but was unused to independent command, and now faced odds of 4-1. As Russian forces advanced through Poland, he continued to retreat west, leaving garrisons to hold strategic fortresses, most of which were soon besieged. On the 7th of February, Russian troops entered Warsaw unopposed. Napoleon's Polish client state, the Duchy of Warsaw, effectively ceased to exist.
Yep.
3 weeks later, Russian troops entered Berlin, while Sweden joined the Allies. Sweden was ruled by Napoleon's former Marshal Bernadotte, now officially known as Crown Prince Karl Johan. Many would accuse him of betraying Napoleon, but he'd always been clear that once he became Sweden's Crown Prince, he'd pursue Swedish interests, which is what he now claimed to do. in exchange for Norway, to be taken from France's ally Denmark, and £1 million from Britain. Bernadotte agreed to join what was now the 6th coalition against France since the Revolution, with an army of 30,000 troops. 10 days later, King Frederick William of Prussia declared war on France. It followed weeks of indecision.
Yikes.
The king was widely seen as a weak character and terrified of Napoleon. But with guarantees of Russian military support, the return of lost territory, and enormous financial and material aid from Britain, he agreed to field an army of 80,000 men.
What I'm curious about, actually, and I don't really have the answer to this at all, is that how is, like, Britain's objective here is obviously that they can't fight them on the continent directly, right? Obviously, they send troops to Spain and everything like that, but they're not going to be able to fully take over the territory. And France is obviously not going to be able to penetrate against the British Navy. But what I'm curious is that all this money that's being given out, how much of this has had an impact on Britain itself? Like, did this have large impacts on their treasury, on their economy, anything like this? I'd be curious to see what the economics and the sort of finances are of funding these wars.
17th of March, he issued a proclamation to the people of Prussia and Germany, "An mein Volk," to my people, summoning them to fight for Prussia and Germany's honor, in what would soon be known as the German War of Liberation. The Prussian army had been greatly reformed since its humiliating defeat to Napoleon in 1806. A military commission headed by General von Scharnhorst had sacked nearly 200 old generals and abolished flogging, expanded recruitment, and introduced exams for officers, and overhauled training, tactics, and drill.
Yeah, you know, and I spoke about this before, but it's important to remember that the key to officership was sometimes you would just purchase your way into becoming an officer in the military, right? If you were a landowner, or you were someone with any sort of power or influence or money, you could just buy your way into military titles. So you didn't have a system of merit that would bring officers up, right, or even non-commissioned members to then commission and become officers, but rather you would just have people, even very inadequate and unqualified people, becoming officers and then leading men to their demise, which is pretty messed up if you think about it.
When Napoleon met the new Prussian army in battle 2 months later, he remarked, "These animals have learned something." Small consolation, they'd learned most of it from him.
Yep.
This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream.
There you go. Go check out CuriosityStream, support Epic History TV, or become a patron, which is what I did. I became a patron on their Patreon.
As his enemies massed in Germany, Napoleon was in Paris, working tirelessly to build a new army with which to face them. 137,000 new conscripts joined the army, and laws passed to call up 100,000 more, while 40,000 veterans from the army in Spain, 16,000 Marines, and 80,000 men of the National Guard, a home defense force, were transferred to Germany. The new conscripts were nicknamed Marie-Louises, after Napoleon's young wife, who'd passed the new conscription laws in his absence. They were young and raw. 2/3 were teenagers, and there was a severe lack of experienced officers and NCOs. In short, the countless irreplaceable veterans now lying beneath Russian soil. There was also a critical shortage of cavalry, a crisis mocked by British satirists. It would take Napoleon longer to replace the many thousands of horses and trained horsemen who'd perished in Russia. When Napoleon left Paris for Germany in mid-April, the French situation was precarious. Eugene had been forced back behind the river Elbe to the fortified city of Magdeburg. Dresden the capital of Saxony, had fallen to the Prussians. The Duchy of Mecklenburg-Schwerin became the first German state to defect from Napoleon's Confederation of the Rhine. Russian Cossacks raided as far as Hamburg, inspiring local revolts against French occupying forces.
Wow, did not know that. Cossacks in Hamburg.
Meanwhile, Austria stood on the sidelines, so far declining to back either side. Napoleon's miraculous feat of organization meant he now had more than 200,000 troops in Germany. And the Emperor's personal magnetism was undimmed. The morale of his army was high. The Russians, on the other hand, lost their iconic commander, Field Marshal Kutuzov, to pneumonia on the 28th of April. His role was taken over by General Wittgenstein.
Also competent.
Russian troops were exhausted and far from home, their army weakened by the need to contain French garrisons across Poland and Germany.
Oh, how the turns table, right? How the tables have turned, and now you have the invading force away from home, living off the land, besieging garrisons. You know, it always favors the defender at times.
Prussia and Sweden had yet to fully mobilize their strength, and Allied forces barely mustered 100,000 men. They were now heavily outnumbered by Napoleon.
You know, it'd be interesting to think, so what if the Russian Emperor, the Russian Tsar, had have actually made peace with the Emperor of the French? Right? What if what could have then happened if Austria had have just kept their neutrality? Then Napoleon could have actually focused on peace. And I know we'll get to this point, but eventually the Treaty of Frankfurt, which Napoleon denied, which was very, very, very beneficial to him. It was a very, favorable treaty to him, which he didn't really quite answer for. And we'll get to that point. We'll also get into an alt history video about that. But it's just interesting to think of, what if Napoleon was actually able to develop these parts of Europe and sort of craft them in the French image? How much that would have changed, right? If you had had actual peace between France and Russia, prolonged peace, and not just haranguing them into the continental system, which was probably never going to work anyways. It's I don't know. It's interesting to think. What do you think would be the difference? Let me know down below.
And the French Emperor decided to strike quickly. He ordered Marshal Davout to Hamburg with 35,000 men to secure his northern flank. He would march against the Russian and Prussian forces converging on Leipzig to force a decisive battle. Victory would make Austria think twice about joining the Allies, allow him to rescue the 90,000 men trapped in garrisons across Germany and Poland, and re-establish his dominance over Europe.
He's gonna do it, isn't he? He's gonna do it. I mean, full triumph. The motivation of this man is just astounding.
As Napoleon advanced on Leipzig, the Allies faced a predicament. To risk battle against Napoleon's larger army, or give up Germany without a fight, a potentially devastating blow to Allied morale and any chance of winning Austria over to their cause. Allied headquarters made the bold decision to attack. They knew most of Napoleon's army was made up of raw conscripts, that their own troops were better trained and had a great superiority in cavalry and artillery. The Allies agreed that as Napoleon crossed the Saale River, they would hit his right flank before he could concentrate the full mass of his forces. The two armies were on a collision course. But Napoleon's shortage of cavalry meant he lacked information about Allied movements. On the 1st of May, Marshal Bessières, commanding the cavalry in Murat's absence, was carrying out reconnaissance himself when he was hit by a cannonball and killed instantly. Bessières was the second of Napoleon's marshals to be killed in action, and like Lannes, an old comrade and trusted friend.
shot at
The Allies
Shame.
were able to surprise Napoleon, falling on Marshal Ney's Third Corps near Lutzen. Ney's troops had to cling on in the face of a Russian and Prussian onslaught, while Napoleon rapidly redirected his other corps to fall on the enemy's flanks. At one stage, Napoleon had to personally help rally routing troops as they broke in the face of determined Prussian assaults.
Just like in his first campaign in Italy, him actually getting down there, rallying the troops, just amazing. Just some of those personal characteristics, right? Although Napoleon obviously has the ego the size of Jupiter, it's the fact that he's still willing to get down and dirty and get there to the troops, rallying them there. Still one of those cool personality traits. Probably the most motivated man of all time, even though the majority of that motivation might have come from hubris.
But on the whole, his young conscripts fought with courage. And despite hours of savage fighting, Wittgenstein could not exploit his early advantage.
And this scale is what I can't
As
wait
French
to see.
reinforcements arrived, the battle turned against him. Towards dusk, the Allies were forced to break off the engagement, though they'd inflicted around 22,000 casualties, losing just half as many men. General von Scharnhorst, mortally wounded, was among them. Crucially, Napoleon's lack of cavalry meant he was unable to pursue the enemy, who retreated in good order.
Yeah.
Expecting the Prussians to fall back on Berlin, Napoleon sent Marshal Ney in pursuit, while he continued east. But the Allied army stayed together, withdrawing to a defensive position at Bautzen, deliberately close to the Austrian border, hoping to entice Schwarzenberg to intervene, and daring Napoleon to violate Austrian neutrality.
Oh, good. So the Allies are actually sticking together. They're learning here.
Neither
They're not breaking up as they were before.
happened. Instead, Napoleon ordered Ney to swing south to fall on the Allies' northern flank,
Nice.
while he launched a frontal assault to pin them in place. The battle lasted 2 days, as French infantry struggled forward against the Prussian and Russian lines. But a misunderstanding over Ney's orders caused a delay that allowed the Allies to narrowly escape Napoleon's trap. Once more, the Allies fought with great determination and inflicted many more losses than they suffered. There were more casualties during the pursuit, including the next day General Duroc, Grand Marshal of the Palace, responsible for Napoleon's personal arrangements, and his closest surviving friend. Riding with Napoleon's staff, a freak cannon shot ricocheted off a tree and disemboweled him.
Ooh.
His slow, painful
Ooh.
death deeply upset Napoleon.
Yikes. Yeah.
The Emperor continued his pursuit to Breslau, once again hindered by his lack of experienced cavalry, while Oudinot was sent north to take Berlin, but was held at Luckau by von Bülow's Prussian corps.
You know, watching this series, things really are not the same. After now going through these quick battles here, it doesn't have that same impact as before. And obviously a part of that has to do with how Epic History TV is narrating this, just saying, hey, there was this engagement, there was this conflict, and it wasn't as successful. The trap was not sprung. But it just really pales in comparison to the battles around 1806, 1807, right? Those really peak years of Napoleon. You know, it's not quite the same level of grandeur, so to say, and tactical brilliance as there was before.
On the 2nd of June, with both sides strained to breaking point,
And watch, as I say that, he's gonna do
neutral
something
Austria
amazing.
proposed a ceasefire, which, to the surprise of many, Napoleon accepted.
Okay. Did not expect that. Yeah, well, he's definitely aware.
The armistice of Plaswitz would last more than 2 months, a period of intense diplomacy and military mobilization by both sides. Napoleon wanted time to rebuild his cavalry, a shortage of which had allowed the Allies to escape twice. But he also wanted to keep Austria on side, which he feared might join the Allies with 200,000 troops, even though Emperor Francis I was now his father-in-law, since Napoleon's marriage to his daughter Marie-Louise in 1810. Austrian Foreign Minister Clemens von Metternich, who'd become one of 19th century Europe's most influential statesmen, now took center stage.
One of these days I'll do a video or watch, you know what I mean, about Metternich, because he has a fascinating career. It's a historical figure that I would think that maybe, if you ask 100 people on the street, probably 95 of them would not know. But Metternich is really, really an important figure, an important diplomat, a conservative diplomat too, that really did shape Europe, especially in his later years as well. But he had an interesting fall from grace, and I won't spoil it because, like I said, I'll probably do a video on that. But read into him; he's really quite good. Kissinger wrote a book on diplomacy in Europe, and he talks a lot about Metternich in it as well.
Metternich wanted peace and to see Austria restored as a great European power, which meant Napoleon contained, but not crushed, which would hand too much power to Russia. In June, he travelled to Dresden to ask Napoleon to make concessions, while promising the Allies that if he did not, Austria would join them. But Napoleon dismissed Metternich's terms out of hand. He would not return the Illyrian provinces to Austria, agree to the repartition of Poland, or the breakup of the Confederation of the Rhine. All were out of the question. Napoleon famously threw his hat to the ground in fury. "Peace and war lie in your Majesty's hands," Metternich is said to have warned him. "Today you can still make peace. Tomorrow it may be too late." But Napoleon preferred war to what he called a humiliating peace.
Almost like a natural order for him in a way. This would be the strategy, the ultimate successful strategy that the 7th Coalition would put in place. Don't attack Napoleon head on, and again, they've been doing this for years now, but the 7th Coalition is obviously the conclusion of it. Attack his subordinates. Despite the fact that some of the marshals are also quite capable and competent.
August 1813, Austria joined the 6th Coalition and declared war on France. The Allies now had a numerical advantage of 3-2, and a new strategy, the Trachenberg Plan. Recognizing Napoleon's genius, the Allies would avoid battle with the Emperor and instead target his marshals, threaten his flanks, and wear down French forces, until it was time to close in for the kill.
Which really kind of makes you question, although I think that this tactic was done, I don't think this was the first. I could be completely wrong. I could be remembering the videos incorrectly. But you'd think, how long did it take for them to realize, hey, that guy who's the tactical genius, don't attack him, attack the other guys.
Over the next few months, the coalition would also receive massive material support from Britain. Including £8 million in silver and gold coin, 200 cannon with transport, 120,000 firearms, 18 million rounds of ammunition, 23,000 barrels of gunpowder, 30,000 swords and sabres, 150,000 uniforms, 175,000 pairs of boots, 1.5 million pounds of beef, biscuit and flour, and 28,000 gallons of rum and brandy. The total value of
an army marches on its stomachs but parties with its alcohol.
British aid to the coalition in 1813 was £11.3 million. Today, worth around $500 million.
Okay, not as much as I actually would have thought. $500 million, okay. Okay.
Napoleon, meanwhile, had turned Dresden into a major supply depot and strengthened his cavalry arm, though it remained a pale shadow of its glorious past. Murat returned to lead it, his secret approach to the Allies having been rebuffed.
Probably my favorite marshal, I would think. Maybe him or Ney, I'm not sure.
But when news arrived of King Joseph's disastrous defeat to Wellington's Anglo-Spanish-Portuguese army at the Battle of Vittoria, Napoleon had to send Marshal Soult, one of his best commanders, to salvage the situation. On the 15th of August, Napoleon left Dresden and advanced against what he considered the most urgent threat: the joint Prussian-Russian army of Silesia, commanded by General Gebhard von Blücher, soon to win the nickname Marshal Vorwärts, Marshal Forwards, for his aggressive leadership.
Not the first time.
But Blücher followed the new plan and retreated when he learned of Napoleon's advance. Napoleon then received news from Marshal Saint-Cyr, holding Dresden with 20,000 men, that Schwarzenberg's gigantic army of Bohemia was approaching, and the city and its supplies were in danger. Napoleon left Marshal MacDonald to keep an eye on Blücher, and raced back to Dresden, sending Van Damme's First Corps to threaten Schwarzenberg's communications. By the time the Allied assault began, enough reinforcements had arrived to fight off the attack.
The scale, man. Just the scale.
The next day, despite being heavily outnumbered, Napoleon ordered a counterattack.
I have a feeling we'll see this in the movie.
Struggling through mud and heavy rain,
yeah, we'll definitely see this
Murat's
in the movie.
advance, supported by Victor's Second Corps, broke the Allied left flank and took 13,000 prisoners. The Allies had suffered a disastrous defeat because they'd ignored their own rule.
Don't
take on Napoleon in battle.
Yeah, exactly.
But news soon arrived that turned the situation on its head. Marshal Oudinot had resumed his advance on Berlin with 66,000 men, but in 3 days of heavy combat around Grossbeeren, he was defeated by Bernadotte's Army of the North. Some of the most savage fighting was between Napoleon's Saxon allies and von Bülow's Prussians, two German states that for now remained on opposing sides.
And now just oppose each other in political voting and football.
3 days later, at the Katzbach River, Blücher inflicted a crushing defeat on Marshal MacDonald, driving some French troops into the river itself. MacDonald lost 30,000 men, 3 Eagles and 100 guns, for Blücher's 22,000 casualties.
Yikes.
3 days after Napoleon's victory at Dresden, as Van Damme's corps pursued the Allies, it became trapped in wooded valleys around Kulm and was overrun. General Van Damme himself was dragged from his horse by Cossacks, as he and 10,000 of his men were made prisoner. Napoleon sent Ney to take over from Oudinot, who engaged Bülow's Prussian corps at Dennewitz. The Prussians, fighting to save Berlin, held their own until Russian and Swedish reinforcements arrived to turn the battle decisively in the Allies' favour. Ney's retreat became a rout, with the loss of another 22,000 men.
Ooh.
Napoleon's brilliant victory at Dresden had been
50,000?
completely overturned
Yeah.
in just 10 days.
Crazy. Wow.
The Allied plan was working. Napoleon became increasingly frustrated as Allied armies withdrew wherever he advanced, and advanced wherever he was not. His teenage conscripts were exhausted by constant marching, and famished as Saxony had been stripped bare of supplies. Thousands fell sick, thousands more deserted.
Brutal, brutal, brutal.
Russian and Prussian light troops were now operating behind Napoleon's army, harassing his communications with France.
Supply lines as well.
Many of Napoleon's marshals advised him to pull back to the River Rhine.
Yikes.
But Napoleon wasn't giving up Germany without a fight.
Nope, of course not. What's he gonna do? Fall back to Leipzig? Okay, there you go. Took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah, I mean, what can you do though? You have a sixth coalition that's stronger, working together, cooperating, and they're just targeting the right people. And Bernadotte obviously knows Napoleon's tactics. All of them have been training on Napoleon's tactics. It's just fascinating to see. You know, there's something about it, just the sheer, what would you say, dominance that once existed is now being turned on its head.
October 1813, Napoleon faced 1/3 Allied troops in Germany, converging on him from 3 directions.
Wow.
900 miles away, Field Marshal Wellington was crossing the Bidassoa River into France. The first enemy army on French soil in nearly 20 years. While the Kingdom of Bavaria, a French ally since the days of Austerlitz, had secretly agreed to switch sides and would declare war on France on the 14th of October.
Verdammten Bayern.
Napoleon planned to defend the line of the River Elbe. But the arrival of General Bennigsen's reserve Russian army freed up Blücher, who suddenly marched to join forces with Bernadotte and forced his way across the Elbe at Wartenberg. Napoleon went north with 150,000 men, seeking the decisive battle that would change his fortunes.
God.
But once more, Blücher narrowly escaped him. Then came news from Murat, who'd been left with 67,000 men to cover Schwarzenberg. The enemy had bypassed Dresden and was heading for Leipzig.
Ooh.
If the city fell, Napoleon would be cut off from France.
Completely encircled.
Once more, he was advised to fall back to the Rhine.
Nope.
But instead, Napoleon ordered all his forces to concentrate at Leipzig. He would risk everything in one great battle to decide the fate of his empire and the fate of Europe.
This man. What?
Thank you.
What? He bets it all on Leipzig. Oh, I just want to watch it. I want to watch it right now. Like, I don't even want to stop. I just want to hit the stop record button and get right into it. Man, I don't even know what to say. Like, it's almost like a speechless thing at this point, right? Because again, watching this series, I'm learning a ton because I know the vague timeline of the Napoleonic Wars, but really getting into the details here, it's like Napoleon is just one of a kind, just amazing. Thank you very much for joining me so far. Yeah, what can I say? Best series on YouTube. Go become a patron of Epic History TV. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed this one. Take care. Leave a comment down below. I'd love to discuss this one with you guys. I'll see you in the next one to an absolutely brilliant battle at Leipzig. I'm super curious what Napoleon's going to do. Till then.